the more foreign, the more strange, the better, because that keeps us sharp, it keeps us alert.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Katja Schleicher. And that's as close as I'm going to get to the correct pronunciation as possible. Here's 3 facts I think you should know about Katja. 1, she strongly believes that talking is gold and silence the beginning of trouble. That's why communications became her passion and business model in that order. 2, she feels more comfortable when people around her are coming from very different places in business and mindset-wise. And 3, because she loves shoes so much, she became a shoe designer and pattern maker. Katja, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hi, George. How are you doing? Hi.
I'm good. Delighted to be talking with you.
I'm here as well.
And here's something else interesting that I think listeners should know. You're talking to us today from the Netherlands. You speak and are fluent in 3 languages, plus 2 others that you can order in a restaurant, which leads to our topic for today, cross-cultural communication. What sort of challenges and problems do you see in cross-cultural communication? And as we go along, I think we'll also look at there are different forms of cross-culture. So let's start first with the challenges.
You correctly said that I really love to be around people that come from different backgrounds and mindsets, because and that brings me to intercultural communication in a straight line. This is where it's getting interesting, where everything is the same or similar. Over time, it's getting less interesting. We are getting sloppy. We think, yeah, he or she, they will understand me anyway, even if I do not pronounce clearly, even if I'm in sloppiness, right? And that was one of the reasons why I liked the title of your podcast, Your Intended Message, so much. Then very often the intention doesn't get through. It simply gets lost in translation. And you see that not just in business, you see that in relationships a lot, that after, a certain time, it's like, oh yeah, George, yeah, of course I love George, yeah. And the intention behind it kind of gets lost. So in intercultural context, this is one of the biggest challenges, and that is one of the most beautiful things, that it's never getting boring, because there's always an impulse, there's always a nudge, there is always something that happens, right? And especially in intercultural contexts, we as human beings, it's in us, we try in particular hard to get our intended message across, and we take effort. We check back. If you ever had a relationship with someone from a different cultural or language background, you know that. You make double and triple sure, okay, did sweetheart get what I meant? Or did he just hear my words? And that, to me, is the way we should face all the challenges in intercultural communication. So accept there is someone from a different intercultural background. Again, intercultural team does not mean just countries. It could be in the same company that you speak to someone from the purchasing department. And if you are from the marketing department, I can assure you there are quite some cultural differences in communication, right? So the more foreign, the more strange, the better. Because that keeps us sharp, it keeps us alert. And of course, this is tiresome. Yes, it is much more easy if you have somebody who, I'm mumbling and you know what you mean. Yep. But on the other hand, it gets boring so fast. So the challenge to bring it back to this one sentence challenge is in intercultural communication. It really requires everything from you, but it rewards you with everything as well. You will learn so many new things, in my perspective.
And I can agree with you there, Katja, that we need stimulus to grow, to learn. And certainly from my own experience with traveling and even through the podcast here, the ideas and concepts that I hear from other people or just perspectives allow us to say, hey, the world doesn't operate only the way we think it should.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know about you. In your world, you're a male communication person. You've been on the radio, so you have a certain world. What is the things that you take for granted? What would you say? Like, yeah, this is the way it should be, because culture is what we do when no one is looking, right?
Yeah, and in my case, I pay a lot of attention to words, and I pick my words most of the time carefully. Most of the time, there are times when I make mistakes, but I tend to be picky and annoyed with people who don't pick their words as carefully as I do.
So you see, so someone, for instance, who comes from a completely different artistic background, right? Where, for instance, body language plays a much more important role, nonverbal communication, that would be probably in your cultural cluster would be something that you would not pay that much attention to. And we all have that. And the more we are aware of that, I say, okay, I'm picky with words. It does not necessarily have to mean that everybody else is picky with words too. Maybe these guys, these girls have different things that are to be appreciated, right? So eyes and ears open is already a very good beginning.
And Katja, and I suppose with any communication, not only cross culture, one probably needs to like step outside oneself and kind of look at the conversation and saying, George, is she really getting what you're saying, or is she interpreting it differently? And maybe you need to say it differently.
Yeah, and what helps, and I don't know about your experience, George, in this, usually culture is showing us not a world as it is, but as we are. It says much more about our own perception than about the world. And when we learn that this perception is just one in a million or in a billion of perceptions, that already helps us to get a very big step closer to really understanding the Georges of this world are the accountant people, right? I never understood accountants, really. Like deep in my heart, this is the most unnecessary profession there is. Of course, they strongly disagree, right? So, but it's so interesting to see their world operate, how smooth it works. It's not my world, but it's a very interesting one. And there is these moments and these times and these messages when these two worlds overlap, or even three worlds, that is where the communication mirror starts. And this is where all of a sudden intention of a message gets so much richer, and we all can profit from that communication situation of so much. And that is where I think the magic begins.
And Katja, you just disparaged accountants, and I make fun of them often too, because they're so easy to make fun of. If you had the challenge of needing to communicate with accountants, or whether it's one or perhaps it's a group, a small committee, how would you make that productive?
And especially with that target group, I have a very good experience in diving into their world of numbers. George, it was unbelievable. Once I tried to use their buildings, their highways, their visualization stories, all of a sudden it worked. Let me give you an example. I'm in this presentation training, and there is this client who says, I need money from the board for this initiative. Okay, and we are very bad in doing this and this to our clients. Okay, and we discussed that, and it comes down to a number. It comes down to the number 7. This is the number the company called their clients on the telephone in a certain time frame, which was at a very low rate. Usually this rate should have been 10 times higher. Okay, so all of a sudden this number 7 was the center of our intention, was the center of our intended message. Because what we wanted is that the audience, in this particular case, the board of accountants, was easily helped to understand that 7 is a very low number, and actually we need money to enhance that. So, and there was the 7 was the easiest argument, because we were using something from their world. And we did in the presentation with the board, then we did a lot of things like, let's guess, let's calculate, how often should we talk to the clients? How often does the industry talk to the clients? And they were all over the place and discussing and guessing and debating, because they were communicating in their world. And that was all easy. And then we, of course, could say, like, look, it's the number 7. And there was that silence in the room, because they all of a sudden they had not expected that it was supposed to be that bad, that little, right? So, and all of a sudden, getting the budget for this campaign was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer. It was like jump, boom, goal, right? Just because we were diving into their language system, into their parameters, and then translating them into what we needed.
And Katja, so I can see that the next time I need to talk to a group of accountants, if I start the presentation, if I start my talk with a number, then it's more likely they're going to be interested. It could be 7, or it could be 13%, or it could be 4.1. But if you start with a number, now they'll perk up, because you're talking their language.
Their language, yeah. Or a relationship, something like from there to there, from 10 to 20%. But you're in their system, and actually, every cultural cluster has beautiful systems. You just need to dive into that. Let me give you another example. There is different systems and now I'm talking really between different countries. The more you go towards Latin American and South European countries, they have a polychronic time understanding, meaning that you can do a lot of things at the same time, which is totally normal. If you're coming from a culture of monochromic time understanding, where we are used, me for instance, being German, where we are used to starting with something, finishing it, and then starting the next task. For us, this South American, Latin American, South European way of doing things looks totally chaotic. We're like, oh my God, how do they ever get anything done at all? Right? For this cultural cluster, this is the normal way to go, because other things are more important than just, for instance, to finish a task before you start a new one. And the more you learn that, the more you experience that, the more your intention, and we always have an intention when we go somewhere, right? It is we never go intentionless. That is the good thing. The more chance you have that your message is not just a message, but the intended message.
And what I'm hearing in what you're saying there with that comparison between, German time thinking and Latin American thinking is one of the first things I think we have to tell ourselves is there's not one right way.
No, indeed. There's millions, right? And the example you were mentioning with, oh my God, this is a person who is not picky with words, might not be such a nice person, right? This is such a trap for ourselves, right? And the more we find our own traps, which is, I think, a huge adventure to do, and a fun adventure to do, because when we are positive enough and not just beating ourselves, oh, I'm so bad, I can't do this, but benevolent, saying like, oh yeah, oh, here we go, oh, there's my trap here, and oh, I totally stepped into that trap on my own today, and tomorrow it's getting better. So this is, I think, the way we develop ourselves, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. And I find that when I fall into my traps, when I react to something, and later I'm able to reflect, or sometimes I can catch myself. Sometimes.
Yeah, you do.
And I found this recently. I was in a conversation on social media, and I said something. The other person said something, and I'm thinking, that is so strange.
Yeah.
And before I responded, I thought, maybe he doesn't mean it the way I'm reading it.
And what did you do then? Did you ask, or did you follow up?
Well, I responded less. I responded more neutral.
Okay. Yeah, you see, makes sense, right? Let's see. But because what you said, right? You don't know. You have an idea. You have an intention. But you need this feedback channel. You need that somebody comes and says like, okay, got that. That is why in all the in the airplane industry, and all these military things, that they always have to back channel saying, okay, I don't know, 12, roger that. So that there was always a feedback. I got what I understood your message, and I do what you say, right? Now, in usual conversations, we don't say roger that, but we have a counter comment, or we have a question, or we start a conversation, whatever that is. But the principle of having a channel back from the other person, may it be a visual one, that we look into each other's eyes and say like, oh yeah, oh, there's a nod, I see the nod, I see the smile, that might be a good sign. Or I'm having George who says, oh, this is a nice word you just used. Then I know, I'm in safe territory with George here, right? And there are so many others. And the more we are aware of our own cultural upbringing, there's a lot of education, the more we are forgiving to others as well, and the more open we are to the different things we see or we hear.
And Katja, let's look at a diverse workforce where we've got people from different countries, different religions, different mother tongues, and working together, who need to come together to work as a team. What can a team leader do to have a more cohesive workforce?
There is a couple of things that are easily to be done. Now, the first one I always recommend, and George, with words, you probably know that, enjoy not knowing. enjoy that there are things you have no clue, right? And put them on the table. Oops, how does that thing work here? And then it might be that someone says, oh, you should know that. That, okay, here we have it. Here is my intention was different. Beautiful, right? So enjoy not knowing. And then there is, especially when you have more cultures working together and not just two, build up your own rhythm so that there is, after time, that just doesn't happen immediately, that this team develops kind of its own language, its own rhythm. That is, especially you were mentioning cohesiveness, George, this is what makes them collaborate more closely together, right? So that is a wonderful thing. Then, especially when it comes to leadership, think as well as, and not either or. This is a very helpful one. Yes, in leadership, in the end, there has to be taken a decision. Oh, yes, of course. There is a point in a discussion where someone has to stand up and say, okay, this is the way we go, this is what we do, and now we go. And there is an end of debate, discussion, whatever it is. But before that, there's a lot of alternative thinking, and mostly because very often we think, okay, I know how that works, let's do it that way. We think either or instead of thinking as well as. I think this is already helping a lot if you, especially people with different time understandings from different religions on the same project.
How do you feel about a leader in the workforce learning more about the other people's culture, language, or beliefs? How can they do that without appearing to intrude?
Now, there is this wonderful balance between interrogation or intruding and curiosity. And what I invite my clients to do very often is to treat their teams as a destination and behave themselves as the best tourist they could be. Because when we go somewhere and we are tourists, we are curious, right? We are usually wired for question. You just, when we started, you just asked me in German, wo ist der Bahnhof? Where is the station? Right? So as tourists, we are wired for questions because we know that maybe our intended message is not getting through. So asking a question is very helpful here. And if you're in leadership position and you have a team to lead, I recommend that highly. Be a tourist in your own team. Be curious, not intruding and interrogating, but be curious. Like you go on a sightseeing tour every day. Oh, there's George. Oh, George, I've never seen someone doing this or that in my entire life. How did that evolve? Right? It's like, and if I would be your boss, George, I'd go on George sightseeing. So I think that this is because then people get a chance to respond, right? You could tell me now, oh, that evolved like this or that, and this is the reasons why I'm very picky with my words, and all these things we already talked about. And that is when you build when you're leading a team, you build a reservoir that you can use when you have a tough time with your team. So be curious, but not interrogating.
And do you recommend that the leader learn one or two or a few words in the language of the people that are working with them?
But George, isn't that part of curiosity? Look, you said that to me as well. You were very proud, right, with being in Germany, and here's my German sentence. And you were proud of that, right? It was fun that we had this. It was a very tiny little conversation, and you liked it. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that. By the way, for more than one reason. Of course, one of the reasons is respect, right? It is respectful that you can, of course, greet your team in its mother tongue, for instance. But besides being respectful, you learn a lot about yourself, right? It was very, and you really did well, right? George, you tried to pronounce my last name, which is a nightmare. It's a nightmare to pronounce from someone who comes from the United States. But that immediately gave us the chance to connect. Right? We spoke about that. So here, you discovered something, and this discovery could be the nugget for the next conversation you have. So it's respect, it's discovery, and interesting enough, you learn more about yourself than about the other culture. And the last thing why I favor that so much, these are the stories at the end of your career you are going to tell. Oh my God, there was this, and there was George, and George couldn't pronounce my last name. It was a nightmare. And that's why George called me always by my first name, even if he knew my last name. But and the time I spent with George was brilliant, blah, 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 1, 2, 3. This is the material. This is what stories are made of. This is what, in the end of our careers, makes us sit on the porch with a beer and have a discussion about that. And that's what people want to hear. Yeah.
And I imagine that one of the easiest ways and most attractive ways to connect cross cultures is with food.
All the time, and be open in what happened. What's your favorite dish? What is your favorite dish?
My favorite is Italian food.
And what precisely?
It would be rigatoni and meatballs.
Okay, so now here I come. You're American German. We talk about Italian food, and we say, you know what, rigatoni meatballs is not an Italian dish. Exactly. No one in Italy would ever make you that, right? Because they think differently. So it's a highly Americanized dish. It's a wonderful dish, and all of a sudden we have a discussion about that. Okay, what kind of tomato do you use? Do you take onions? How big are the meatballs in your sauce? Do you cook them up front, or do you cook them with the sauce? So all that. And then all of a sudden the Italians could join and say, no, niente. This is a completely not that. No, we do differently. And all of a sudden, you don't know where the evening, how the evening went, but all of a sudden it's 2:00 in the morning and you were slightly drunk and had a wonderful night.
And it's funny, as you're saying that, I remember listening to at a gathering somewhere, listening to an Italian man who was given advice on how to make meatballs, and he said, "You don't put oregano in meatballs; you put basil." So I stopped using oregano, and now I use basil.
Because oregano you put in other things, but it's too strong for the meat. So you see, and all of a sudden you are in conversation. So food is always a very good connector. Yes, yes. Funny sometimes in cultures where people, where you can't deny the food, right? Where you have to eat, and maybe you're a vegetarian and you have trouble to eat meat or all that thing. Now there are so many funny communication situations. How do you say no respectfully to something that is on your plate, right? And you can fill books with that. But this is exactly the fun thing. And that is what keeps, I think, businesses thriving, that you learn to communicate, especially with the people from the other side of the rainbow.
And it It just occurred to me when you were saying about how do you say no to things on your plate. Sometimes, there is something they put in front of you, and you say, "I can't eat this. What do I do?"
Exactly. And this is very in many trainings we teach that. Yes, how do you how do you drink responsibly? How do you say yes to things and no to things, and be in your own value, but keep the values of the other parties? And if you have more than one nation on the table, it is always heaven for me. And one of my most loved pictures is to be on a breakfast buffet in a big hotel in Singapore or in Hong Kong, where really the world meets and a melting pot exists. And breakfast, I think, are the most special meal in our day, right? And so many different things. And if you're in Hong Kong in a hotel and you have a look at the selection and at the variety of tastes, right? There are things in this breakfast buffet that I would never ever touch in my entire life. Well, there is many other people saying, "Oh, this is good. This is good. I didn't know that Vietnamese love pho, the soup, right? The noodle soup, that they even love that for breakfast." So I did, oh, look at this. Yeah. So in Hong Kong, in this hotel, they serve pho for breakfast. So yeah, it's wonderful when conversations start at the table. And by the way, not just privately, but in business as well.
Katja, we're getting close to wrapping up. People can find out more about your programs at the website, and that link is in the description below. Who should reach out to you and why?
You made already a very good point, George, in pointing out business leaders who are working with international teams in whatever constellation, right? Either there was a merger, there was an acquisition, there was a takeover, all of a sudden there is a new department, or a department needs to be integrated into another department. And all the conversations and all the communication troubles that occur there, they are exactly my business.
And you can find the link to her website below. Katja, in wrapping up, if you could offer 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to a new team leader who's come into a team that's got a diverse team in terms of cultures, how can they start on the right foot? What can they do?
So a couple of things we already mentioned, but just let me repeat them, don't that's a very good thing. So be a tourist in your own team, in your new team. So treat your team as a touristic destination where you would start with asking questions. And if you ask a question, that is most of the time followed by listening, right? So listen and then ask a question again, and don't draw conclusions too early. On the other hand, the second one probably merge your own rhythm with the rhythm of the team, because most of the time you have a task to do as the leader, right? There's a project that has to be executed and all that. So that has to come into that as well. And the third one, learn where the strength in your teams are. If you know that this is a culture that is much better in the end, towards the end of a project, right? Like the Germans, once the machine is running, no one can stop it. But ask Germans about brainstormings, creativity, probably not our strongest suit, right? So find who is capable of doing what more easily. And then the most important probably is keep your eyes and keep your ears open. There are so many things happening every day between the lines that could make your intended message get lost. And this is not what we want, right?
Powerful advice for team leaders. My guest today is Katja Schleicher, reminding you that you need to think as well as, not either or.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.